It's quite a bat cave here, more like a nerdy basement for developers. I had quite a lot of troubles finding this place. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very happy to see that many people interested not only in Spring, reactive microservices, but also the bare bones of what it's all about, so the open source development. This talk is quite important for me for at least 3 reasons. First one is that I normally don't do soft talks, let's call it this way. Normally I do quite a lot of coding. I mess with demo gods with better or worse effects. And the second reason is that that's the very first time for me to be at Devoxx Poland, and it's an amazing venue, amazing conference, full of people and full of great talks from what I've seen from Twitter, because I was lurking yesterday in my room doing a last polish of my slides. But the other reason, which is tremendously important for me, is that this is actually the place where I grew up. And literally, that's 5 minutes walk away through the roundabout next to the Japanese Culture Center, where I was, as a teenager, first roller skating and then doing a lot of skateboarding. And that was great fun, but also quite a bit of epic fails. I won't give you a lot of details about those failures. The only thing I can share with you is the fact that after one of them, I couldn't sit for at least 2 weeks. So yeah, when I was preparing this opening for the presentation, I thought, yeah, it's maybe a funny story to share, but doesn't fit to the whole narrative of the open source development. But then I started thinking about skateboarding and such, and I started digging into the culture more than I used to know from magazines, from videos, from a lot of other sources. And I found, or actually I knew about him, but I found interesting story about the father of skateboarding, or one of the pioneers of skateboarding. Anyone knows who this person is? It's Rodney Mullen, the guy who is a prodigy of skateboarding. He invented so many tricks that it's probably more than the whole code base of Spring Framework. I mean, he invented not only basic tricks, but also the shape of the skateboard as we know it right now. And there are a lot of stories about him, like for example, that his hobby was not appreciated by his parents, so he was practicing tricks in the barn during the long nights. But this still doesn't fit to open source. So I started digging more, and I found one very interesting article about him. Back in 2003, when he was already 35 years old, I believe, he got a hip injury. And it was so serious that the doctors told him he won't be able to skateboard anymore, and he got depressed. At this point, he started thinking about what else can he do if he's not able to practice skateboarding and innovate new tricks. And then he realized that he has a friend in Australia who actually invited him down there to do a skateboarding video, who is actually involved in the Linux community, and he's a coder, like all of us here, I guess. So he decided that he's going to spend his free time digging into OpenSUSE and Debian communities. So he started looking at the how-to manuals, he got involved in the forums, he started interacting with community of hackers, as he called it, and he realized there is a lot of similarities between those two worlds. He said that he realized that both skateboarders and developers have very similar, open source developers in particular, they have very similar way of collaborating. The creative process involved in those two activities is pretty much a path of pain, of trial and error, when you get all these small bits and pieces of information and you make it as a one cohesive whole. But another thing he realized is that both skateboarders who innovate tricks, as well as us developers, we take a lot in the open source manner from the past generations. So let's have a bit closer look about what are the similarities between skateboarding and development in open source. So that's a very basic trick. Doesn't look so basic here, but that's Ollie. I don't have a skateboard, and that was probably 15 years ago when I had it last time, so I won't show you how to do it. But the trick is fairly simple. You basically pull the tail, then you jump, and you just drag the skateboard with you. And that's the foundation of a lot of tricks. It wasn't invented by Rodney Mullen, it was invented by another guy called Alan Gunfold, if I remember correctly. But his version of Ollie was very much for vert, so for ramps. What Rodney did, he took this trick and made it more approachable. He translated it in the way that you can easily perform it on the flat ground. So it's called Flatland Ollie. And the parallel of these two open source, as he said, is that we have some clever but not so approachable code. And what other people in community do, they look at it, they improve it, so it's more accessible for all the others to build on top of it. So next step of the innovation might be a kickflip. It again starts with Ollie. What you do when you are in the air, you kick the board so it goes the rotation, and that's entirely a new trick. So again, in open source world, or in development world, you can think about some clever, basic idea, but when more people get involved in it and start innovating around it, it becomes very robust and versatile. So that's the master himself. I just found some animated GIF. I highly recommend you to go to YouTube and watch his other videos, because what this guy does with the skateboard is just insane. And probably you need to watch it in the slow motion, because it's not so easy to see exactly what kind of tricks he performs with this tiny little piece of wood. But when you will be procrastinating on YouTube, then have a look at the related videos of Rodney Mullen. Because now he's doing a lot of presentation on events like TED, when he shares not only the story of how he got into open source, but he's a very curious mind, very deep into the science. So I definitely recommend you to spend a few minutes to see how interesting this person is. But then, okay, that's about skateboarding and a bit of similarities with open source. How this all started with open source? So there are several stories about it. One of them is that it actually started with the printer. The printer in MIT Artificial Intelligence Labs back in early 80s, where they ordered a new printer from Xerox. That was probably model 9700. It was so huge that it didn't fit into one office room where other people were working, so they found another place, like here in the basement, presumably, and they installed the printer there. And not so long after, they realized that the printer is jamming constantly. And especially one person got very annoyed by this fact. Anyone knows who he is? Richard Stallman. I think I heard the right answer. So one day, he was working quite deeply on something, and he wanted to print out some report to then use it to summarize his research. And after a few hours when he sent the report to print, he went down only to realize that the printer is jammed again, and it's actually not even his report, but somebody else's paper. So then, having some experience with hacking devices from the past, he wanted to fix it and build some sort of a notification system so that whenever the printer is jammed, everyone will be informed and somebody will take care of it. Probably doesn't work that well in the offices anyway, but at least the idea was pretty good to let the people know that there is some issue. So he looked at the device driver they received, and he realized that it's just binary they have, so he cannot really fix it as he would like to. So he contacted the software vendor and told them, look, I would like to see the source code because the driver is buggy and I know how to fix it. But they said, hold on a minute, this is our intellectual property, you won't receive it. And at this moment, he realized that the way how software vendors are treating their software is harming the society and actually slowing down the innovation. And this is how the free software movement was born, which was one of the cornerstones of open source movement as we know it now. Fast forward to 30 plus decades from this event, open source is literally everywhere. It's on my watch, it's in all your handheld devices, except of one starting with I guess. We pretty much run everything on open source, even when we don't realize it. I mean, cloud is all fueled by open source anyway. So what is really open source in a nutshell? Obviously, it has something to do with the source. We do have access to the source code, which is tremendously helpful when we want to learn how a particular piece of technology works, how all the things are interacting with each other when we debug. If we don't have it, then in Java we might try to decompile, but it's not giving the full picture. Then obviously we are allowed to remix and redistribute, so we can pick all the smaller tools, build it as our own solution, and redistribute it, assuming that we are compliant with the licenses. But I won't talk about the licenses here, it's a bit of a long story, and probably not really relevant for this topic as such, for this talk as such. And then obviously, the other very important aspect, if not the most important one, is a higher degree of cooperation. As it's open source and it's available to everyone on our planet, every single one of you can just go there and contribute and help to make this software better, fix the bugs like Stallman was trying to back in the 80s. And if you think about it for a bit longer, you will realize that most of the big players are actually deep into open source. Starting from Red Hat, which is purely open source company having few billions of revenue and growing insanely year after year, through Google, which is releasing a lot of open source software these days, going to Microsoft, which moved everything to GitHub and closed their Codeplex initiative not so long ago. And also looking at the local market, Allegro is doing a lot of open source activities these days. Because the point is, the source code as such is not really that important. So it can be publicly available, so all people who are interested in it will contribute and probably will shape it to be better. Important thing is what kind of services you can do with the software. So that's why I believe people are more and more interested in sharing those lower pieces of code rather than protecting it as something very, very important. Okay, so what do we gain from open source? We gain quality. Like there's a Linus law coined by Eric Raymond, which is one of the fathers of open source movement. He said, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So if the code is all available in open, every single developer can look at it and can help spotting the bugs. Then, as a consequence, actually security gets better, even though we can recall several events from not so long ago, like for example with shell shock. But having code in the open somehow forces developers to write it in clearer and more understandable way. So then other people can, again, look at it and help spotting security bugs. But also you can pick and mix. You can customize it. If you don't see a certain functionality, you can build it as the source is open. So how can we contribute? I'll start from the top. So the main way of contributing is obviously through the code. And by that, I don't necessarily mean implementing new features, but also fixing bugs, improving tests. That's actually a very easy way to start. Looking at code readability and improving it so other people can understand it easier. But that's only one part, and probably the hardest one. So let's see how we can get there. Another way is obviously spotting the bugs. And if you follow Twitter tech crowd, you can very frequently see people complaining about it. But I would highly recommend to not stop there, because complaining is easy. If you spot the bug, try not only to fire issue on GitHub or on Jira, try to provide a test which can reproduce the issue, or even some small project which will be a reproducer. Going further, obviously documentation. We all know that documentation in open source needs some love. And that's for several reasons. One of them is that most of the projects are run by community and they don't really have full-time dedicated employees. So if you would like to contribute to documentation, it's for me as a maintainer of a bunch of open source projects is equally important as code fixes. And it's available at hand as the code is. Another way is, which is maybe not a direct, by code means, the direct way of contributing is helping. If you go to forums or Stackoverflow, get engaged with users, trying to understand their problems, you will grow, you will get involved more, you may be eventually gonna be asked to write a book about it. For some people, it's an interesting journey. I never wrote one, but I heard from a bunch of friends that it's a terrible stuff, so think twice. But it's another way of contributing to open source, helping others to go through some painful cases. Then if you have, I mean, we know that there is a stereotype about developers that we suck with a UI, we suck with graphics. But if you have some sort of artistic soul and you have some notion of aesthetics, open source projects need this kind of people just for a logo or for a better website. If you think about tools purely designed by developers, you don't need to look further than, for example, Toad, the SQL client. If any one of you ever used Toad, you will know what I mean. It's just full of buttons and impossible to follow. Then another way might be also to write about it. If you use software and you think it's cool, or even better if you think it sucks, write a blog post, show why you think it's valuable, what are the corner cases, what are the pain points. It's another way of letting open source communities know that the project is of interest and there might be some room for improvement like there always is. Going to the next level is what I'm trying to do now, public speaking. It requires courage, it's damn stressful, but it's damn worth it. But so spreading the word about a tool of choice which you like on the conferences is amazingly valuable contribution. It's also very good added or a hidden value for yourself, because as one of the sci-fi American writers whose name I actually forgot, he said once, when one teaches to learn. What it actually means is that when you prepare a talk or even better a workshop, you need to step into the beginner's shoes and learn even more as you think you know, because we all suffer from what is called the curse of knowledge. We treat a lot of things as obvious and then we cut the corners when explaining, whereas when you need to run the talk or workshop, you really need to be super precise and understand the topic very deeply because you never know what kind of question will arise. And the most important thing, doesn't matter which way you contribute, is your ideas. Because if you want to keep the communities and projects healthy and you use those tools, share your ideas however ridiculous you think they are. Because from the community perspective, we kind of have a tunnel vision maybe how our tool can work, but outsiders' perspective might open very fruitful discussions. Because together as a team, we're gonna achieve more. So when I was working on this talk, I was actually asking myself, what drives people to contribute? What are the main reasons why people get involved and spend their free time writing some software which is not their job? So I ran a small Twitter poll, and this is what happened. I got flooded with answers. Well, maybe not necessarily that happened because I don't have an account with millions of followers. I actually don't even have 2,500 followers like my mother does. So I got just a bunch of responses, probably 10. But I was able to get out of it few important aspects. So first one is actually that it's some sort of self-realization. I mean, over my career, I was not always so lucky to work in a super cool, cutting-edge project, but I still had to pay my bills, so I found some open source projects to just feel that I do something important and interesting. So that's one aspect which drives people to contribute. Another one is a feel of creating something useful. including myself and a bunch of my friends, we created some tools where we didn't find anything existing on the open source market. So we thought, this is needed, let's open source it and let's see how it will work. For example, if you used some testing frameworks like REST Assured or Awaitility, this is pretty much driven by one person initially, Johan Haleby from Sweden, and now the community is growing, and I think there was even, or there will be a talk about REST Assured at this conference. And an important aspect, again, is growing skills, because you can find something which is not necessarily as close to your daily job and try to broaden your horizons. That's another aspect which drives a lot of people to open source. And some of us contribute for a greater good. And I'm not even saying about those who believe in the idea of open source, and that's just their philosophy. But there are people like Michael Warburger, whom I met at Hacker Garden DevOps 2013, I guess. He's, in his spare time, developing a platform for lending money in developing countries. I think it's called Mesos. But that's for him the main driver. He wanted to be involved in something which will help people not so privileged as we are to have their lives easier. And it's all open source. There is quite a tremendous community. They run a conference just for this tool every year. And that's very interesting reason to contribute, which I never thought of before I met this guy. So now, flipping the coin a bit, why we don't contribute, except of obvious reasons like we don't have time, which I would question because we all have time for Netflix, for example. So you can always find 10, 15 minutes, 1 hour to just do something for open source. But there are other aspects which are more important to discuss. So first and foremost, that's fear. People are afraid that they are not good programmers, that their ideas are not worth, and that they will be laughed down by the community. And it might happen in some communities, but then I would say if that's the spirit of the community, it won't last long. Most of the communities, or all of them which I interacted with, they are very open to anyone with any background and any skills. But there's a more interesting twist to the aspect of being afraid. Some people have what's called in psychology Imposter Syndrome. And what it essentially means and affects a lot of us, including myself, is that you don't feel you are good enough and your achievements are nowhere close to people you work with. And essentially it means you feel like a fraud. You apply enormously high standards to yourself. So I would like to share a few thoughts how you can overcome this way of thinking, even though it's very hard and probably those 3 aspects won't really help immediately, but it's important to have this in mind. First of all, it's okay to don't know about something. It's okay to have holes in your knowledge, because nobody is really expected to know everything. And open source communities will help you go through this journey, because when you start, it's obvious that you are not an expert, but the healthy community will help you grow and go on the way together and grow your skills in a given area. Another thing which is kind of related is that we are afraid to ask questions because we feel they are dumb, but that's not really the thing. You should ask questions when you don't understand something, because what other choice do you have if you don't understand a given piece of code? You either spend hours trying to understand and then get even more frustrated, or you ask the community and they will be more than happy to guide you. That's the whole point of open source, that we collaborate together and we grow together. And then another thing is just start. Don't find the perfect project for you. If you know some technology and you want to get involved in open source and learn the dynamics, learn how this culture works, just pick it up and start working on some small bits. Because again, as a community, as a team, we will achieve more than any individual can do. So how actually we can get started? Because just start, it sounds fairly easy, but it's not necessarily that easy. It used to be pretty hard, because back in the days, computers as well as software was expensive, and we didn't have a luxury of having laptop just in front of us. But also the source code was not easily available. I guess this picture shows maybe the very first code review in the history. But if you think about it now, everything is a commodity. You have source code hosted in the cloud, let it be GitHub, Bitbucket, or any other hosting code repository provider. You can run all your ideas in the cloud for free to just experiment with it, and all the IDEs which let you get started are right at the reach of your hand, and they cost nothing, only your time and probably some learning experience. So therefore, if you want to go get involved, the easiest low-hanging fruits I can think of is, as I said before, Reportbox. If you want to learn how it works, probably look at the tests and write the test together with the bugs. Improve the test. This is how I started, because in majority of open source projects, at least those I know or I was involved in, the documentation are the tests, especially when we talk about some libraries. So if you feel like there is some gap, maybe some corner cases are not covered, or maybe you can use better assertion library, just go for it and just get started. You can also review the code and improve its readability. You can get involved in the pull request reviews and just share your knowledge because you are maybe using the tool. And take some entry-level issues and just work on them. I mean, there is a lot of low-hanging fruits you can get involved. And then when you start to get involved, you get experience, then imagination is your only limit. You can shape the tools together with the community as much as you want and as interesting as you would like it to be. So if you don't have the interesting project you think of right now to get started, there are several places you can look at. I'm not sure how many of you are still students. There are some who are like never-ending students, but open source initiative Google Summer of Code is a very interesting place to join. Also from the maintainer point of view, because you can become a mentor. The way how it works is that open source organizations are applying to Google Summer of Code programs, sharing their projects. Then students are submitting their ideas how to implement a particular thing. And then they work together over the course of summer, which is a bit unfortunate. They work over the course of summer to make this happen. And it's very good experience for a novice person like a student, but also a mentor, because he again needs to step out from the expert's shoes and help him to grow. And you can also discover that your community, your project is not that approachable, so you can improve. And then, speaking from my experience, you can actually gain a contributor. I have one person from last year who is working with us on the project, even after the Google Summer of Code started. He's constantly interested in working on the tool we drafted together. Then there's a code triage, which essentially sends you issues every day, which you can either just pick and work on it, or you can help prioritize or categorize. Because from the maintainer point of view, it might be tricky to get all the issues triaged in a short time. So this tool will let you get contribution also from this angle. You can help clean up the issue tracker, categorize, put labels, and so on. There is also a website called Up for Grabs. The way how it works is that it scans GitHub repos and look for tags or labels on issues which are either up for grabs or help wanted, or for contributors. There are few different labels you can use, and then it's some sort of an aggregator where you can filter the technology and some other aspects, and you can see what's there as a low-hanging fruit to get you started. And we are not around Christmas yet, but there is the 24 pull requests initiative running every Advent, where every day you pretty much can commit yourself. Instead of having Advent calendar with chocolate or beer, you can commit yourself to to send a pull request every day till Christmas, and this can be anything. This can be fixing a typo in the documentation. Just a matter of your dedication and your involvement. Okay, but I was kind of hinting in my abstract as well as in the title that open source as such let you grow skills. So what's in there for you? I mean, it all sounds very idealistic, we work all together on cool stuff, but what's actually a benefit for you? So let's have a look at the one model of acquiring skills, which is, I think, again, from 80s. That's based on the studies of two brothers named Dreyfus. They were studying nurses in hospital and trying to figure out how they grow their skills. And obviously, whenever new thing we are getting into, we are novice. We don't know anything, we just follow the guidelines, we ask everyone what we should be doing. Then over the time, we get to advanced beginner, where we can work autonomously on some stuff, but we treat everything with the equal importance. But then as we jump to competent, proficient, and expert, we gain understanding of a bit of a bigger picture as we go. It sounds fairly easy, it looks like a linear process, maybe like leveling up in Witcher, I don't know. But there is a twist to it, which is called expert beginner, and that's quite a tricky place to be. It's a trap which I've been to. Basically what it boils down to is that you reach the level of experience and expertise in a certain area, let it be a given technology stack or some other particular niche of your domain, and you are just first feel very comfortable and you lose the bigger picture and you feel that you are already an expert. And this is a very tricky situation to deal with, because at some point what you have to ask yourself is, do I have 6 years of experience as a developer or as a software engineer, or is it more like 6 times 1 year of experience? And for me, open source is actually a great way to break out of this trap, because you need to distrap yourself. You need to try to find things which push you out of the comfort zone, because if you continue writing web services, continue writing, I don't know, single-page applications, you're gonna become expert beginner at some point. You will maybe lose a chance to get an overview of all the other important aspects of how to build a successful software project. So from open source, what you can learn from each other. You get people with different background, different experience, whereas in the software project you run in the company, you might be all at the same level, for example. So you might lose a chance to confront your ideas because everything sounds fairly okay. Then another way is exactly what I'm saying, is that open source is a way of getting out from the expert beginner trap, because you can find something which will be tricky and uncomfortable to start with, but you will go back to novice level again, so you can grow and see different aspects of writing software and different paradigms, for example. Then also, if you get more and more into open source, you can become a leader. You can learn how to run the project, how to interact with people, how to review pull requests, and so on and so forth. That's also a very interesting lesson, because you deal with people from different cultures, and that's a very, very challenging thing to do. And you can get friends. That's probably the biggest thing for me. And that's actually my story, which I would like to share with you. I didn't put CV intentionally, because obviously contribution to open source is a sweet spot in your CV. But that shouldn't be your motivation. If you start with motivation, okay, I do some GitHub stuff, so I can show it on CV, I mean, personally, I don't think it's the right motivation to follow. So these are my friends. That's me, probably. If I do this, then you probably can correlate easier. This is Alex Soto from Spain. This is Aslak from Norway. Aslak is lead of Arquillian project, where both me and Alex got involved a long time ago. And we were in the community for a very, very long time. I started in 2011. I was in the project where we were lacking some testing tools, especially for testing JPA. So due to a lack of better tooling, I started first blogging about it, of my ideas of Arquillian, which came around this time. I got into Arquillian community, and since then I developed quite a bit of extensions, and eventually we started working all together in the same company. So that's my story. I got into conferences, I got into coding, and I believe that's a very, very good way of growing your skills and going out of your comfort zone. And that's all what I have. I'm Bartosz Majsak. I grew up just around the corner. When I was a kid, there was nothing here, just a bus stop and kiosk where you could buy some juices, for example. I'm a software engineer at Red Hat. Let me know what you thought about my message, my talk. That's my Twitter handle. If you are interested in what I'm up to at my daily work and my open source, that's my GitHub account. Please follow me so I can finally beat my mother. She has 2,500 followers. I have only 800. So thank you so much. If you have some questions, I will be happy to answer.